Hi, I'm Usman, and today we're going to continue off from where we left last time. Last time we studied a little bit about numbers and some irrational. We've discussed some irrational numbers. We've discussed rational numbers. We've discussed prime numbers, right? And then we did some factorization, which included highest common factor and least common factor, right? And today we're going to continue off from where we left, but this time we're going to start off with a new topic which is called algebra, right? In the last topic we've discussed a little bit about the basics about powers as well as roots, right? Today we're going to start off with our new topic which is algebra. All right, so the first topic that we're going to do in algebra is expression. Okay, expression and equation, right? So is there anybody in the audience who could tell me what's the difference between two? All right, what's the difference by just looking at it, not like a technical difference, just by looking at something. Can you tell me whether or not if it's an equation or uh, it's an expression? So just by looking at it, what difference um, can we get? So how do you analyze just by looking at it that whether or not if it's a um, equation or an expression? How do I identify? All right, so somebody answered that an equation has an equals to sign. That's actually correct, right? So we can just simplify this. Okay, we can simplify this, right? Simplify this, but we cannot find an answer. We cannot find an answer, right? But when we talk about an equation, first we can find an answer, right? We can find an answer to an equation, right? And then the most promising difference, which most of you has now commented, is that there's an equals to in this, and there's no equals to when it comes to an expression. All right, so let's just say that I have an expression 2x plus 7, right? This is something that I just wrote. So just tell me whether or not if this is an expression or an equation. Just by looking at it, can you tell me whether or not it is an expression or an equation? Okay, so this is an expression. Okay, this is an expression, right? Can this expression be simplified? Let me just dissect this expression a little bit. Okay, so when you write 2x, this means that this x is your variable, this x is your variable, and this is a constant value attached to it. This is a constant value which is attached to it. And when you write 2x, that means 2 and x are both in multiplication. Okay, so that is what we mean when we write it as 2x. Okay, now if I say that you can find a value of an equation. Now the second example is of an equation. Okay, so if this is 2x plus 7, but we add equals to 0, Now this whole thing becomes an equation, right? So that's how you differentiate between an expression and an equation. All right, so how do you find a value to an equation? What do I mean when I say that we can find a value to the expression? So we can find the value of the variable. Okay, so we can find the value of the variable that's being used, right? So how do we do that? So let's say, let me just rewrite it. So it's going to be 2x plus 7 equals to 0. And now as plus 7 is in addition right now, right, with 2x, it's being added to 2x. So it's going to move to the other side of the equation. When something is in addition or subtraction, when it's going to move to the other side of the equation, it's going to turn its sign, it's going to change its sign. If it's positive, it's going to change into negative. If it's negative, then it's going to change into positive. All right, so right now 7 isn't positive, right? It's plus 7. So it's going to be 2x equals to negative 7, right? Now 2x, rightly, just like I told you, 2 and x are both in multiplication together. So if one thing, and we're going to make this a subject, we have to make x a subject. How do I make this x a subject? By, what do I mean when I say making a variable the subject? Okay, so when you make something a subject, that means you are separating it from the whole equation. So right now it's attached with 2, right? So we're gonna have to take 2 to the other side as well. So now if we take 2 to the other side, right now it's in multiply. So if something is in multiply on one end of the equation, it's going to go to the other part of the equation, it's going to go into divide. All right, so right now it's going to become x equals to negative 7 divide by 2. And if I had to, move something from divide into multiply, I'm sorry, if I had to move something from divide into to the other part, it's going to go into multiply. All right, just like that, we found the answer to this equation. So I see many of you have answered it. That's excellent, I say. That's very great. Okay, now if I say that we have to simplify expressions, right? So how do we do that? What do I mean when I say that we have to simplify expressions? All right, so right now I'm going to show you some of the questions, and we're going to find out how are we going to simplify expressions. What do I mean when I say that we're going to simplify expressions? Okay, so let's say, let me just give you some questions. Okay, so let's say if I have this question. Okay, not like this, maybe like this. Okay, so this is a question, right? 5x multiplied by 4x and then multiplied by z. So how do I simplify? What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna multiply each one of them with their correspondent. Okay, so a variable is only multiplied with its corresponding variable. Like x is gonna multiply with x, and similarly y cannot be multiplied with its other half because it doesn't have any other variable like y. All right, similarly z doesn't have a variable z in this expression, right? So what are we going to do? We're going to write numbers are going to be multiplied with numbers. So 5 times 4, it becomes 20, right? And then x multiplied by x, right? So x multiplied by x, it's going to become what? It's going to become x squared. Okay, so that's how we write it. If there are three x's being multiplied together, or maybe three variables being multiplied together, right? So it's gonna become y cube, right? If it's 4 times, then it's gonna become y to the power 4, right? So right now these two can only be simplified, right? So what we're gonna write, we're gonna write 20. Now we don't need to write multiply sign when we're writing variables, because it's understood that if we're writing constant with a variable, that means that it's already being multiplied. All right, so 20x square multiplied by this y which was left, multiplied by z. So this is gonna be our simplified answer. Do you guys understand this, or is there any question? If there's any question, then please tell me. Okay, so another part is this. Okay, so this is the other part. It says 3 multiplied by, all right, so bracket indicates that this whole thing is being multiplied by 3. Okay, so how are we going to do that? Can anybody tell me the answer to this, or maybe steps onto how you're going to do this? Can anybody tell me how we're going to do this? Okay, so somebody has answer is going to be 6x plus 15. Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. So what did one person did in the comments? They did, um they first multiplied 3 with the first term, and then they multiplied 3 with the other term as well. So 3 times 2x plus 3 times 5. So what is gonna be the answer? 3 times 2 means 6, and then x is gonna be x, right? 3 times 5 is 15. So this is the expanded answer, right? Now if we have a question where it says something like this. Okay, so we have something like this. Now what are we gonna do? Because these are all this different forms of expansion, different form of simplification that we can do. What do we do when we have plus minus in between, maybe addition or subtraction in between? So what do? We can only subtract or add the values which are same. That means which has the same variable. All right, so 5x can only be added or subtracted with 3x over here. 5x can only be added or subtracted with 3x over here. Similarly, 3y can only be added or subtracted with 7y over here. All right, so what do? If I have to subtract 5x 3x from 5x, right? How do we say this? We say this like we're subtracting 3x from 5x. Okay, and now if I have to subtract, so the other part we're gonna write 3y minus 7y. Okay, so we can only add or subtract the like terms, right? So 5x minus 3x gives us 2x. Okay, so numbers are gonna subtract with each other. Okay, similarly, minus 7x plus 3x, so it's gonna give us an answer of 4y, right? If I add 3x plus 3 minus 7, so what's going to be the answer? Minus 4. Similarly, we're going to get minus 4 as well as y, because y is the variable which is common in both of these terms, right? Is there anybody who doesn't understand this? This is very simple and very basic, right? Everybody understands. Now we're going to go to the last part of this, which is if we're dividing two terms. Okay, so what do? Right, we do it just like we did the multiplication. All right, we can only divide the numbers with the numbers, and we can only divide the variable with the like variables. All right, so the question is 14xy divided by 8x, right? So x is gonna cancel out with the other x, because if it's 2 divided by 2, it's gonna be what? They're both gonna cancel out and the answer would be 1. Similarly, if it's x divided by x, it's gonna be 1, right? So following the same principle, 8 comes in comes in 2's table, right? And 14 also comes in 2's table, but 7 times. So it's gonna be 7y divided by 2, because 2 is the only thing that's left. Does everybody understand this? Oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It's gonna be 4. Yes, it's gonna be 4. Yeah, it's gonna be 4. Thanks for reminding me. It's gonna be 4. All right. Now we move on to the actual question. How the actual questions are gonna be like. Okay. So let's say, and this is one of the most important part of this this topic. Okay. So let's just see. They are asking you to write an expression for parameter of the shape. They're asking you to write an expression for the parameter of the shape. So what's this shape? The shape is a rectangle, right? And how do we find the parameter of a rectangle? This is something that we all should know by now. We, for parameters, what we add all the sides together. All right. So basically, the basic formula is 2 times length plus breadth, right? This is how this is what the formula for rectangle parameter of rectangle is. Okay, so what's the length? The length is x minus 2, right? So we write in place of L is what? X minus 2. And breadth is what? 2x plus 3, right? So what do? We just substitute these values in places of L and B. Okay, so it's gonna be 2 times x minus 2 plus 2x plus 3, right? So it's pretty simple. Now what are we gonna do? We're gonna add the like terms together. All right, so it's gonna be 2 multiplied by. All right, so somebody has answered length multiplied by width, but it's gonna be 2 multiplied by length plus width or breadth, anything that you want to call it. It can also be called width, by the way. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter. All right. But length into width is for area. It's for area. It's not for parameter. Parameter is this. All right. Now we're gonna simplify this. We're gonna add the like terms together. So x plus 2x minus 2 plus 3. All right, so it's going to be 2 multiplied by x plus 2x is going to be 3x, right? And then minus 2 plus 3 is going to be plus 1. So now we multiply 2 with both of these terms. So if I multiply 2 with 3x, is going to become 6x, right? 3 times 2, 6, right? And I'm going to multiply 2 with 1 as well, so plus 2. So this is going to be our final answer. So perimeter of rectangle is equals to 6x plus 2. Is this clear? Has anybody not not understood this? Is there anyone? Right? So I think everybody has understood this completely. So now I move on to another part of this equation. Now if I move on to the equation part, okay, so now this is done, right? I'm gonna move on to the equation part, and now we're gonna mix both of these. We're gonna simplify the expression as well as find out its value, right? So let me just zoom it in. All right, so this is the question. So now is this an expression or an equation? Is this an expression or an equation? All right, so this is an equation, right? Like most of you have answered it correctly. It's an equation, right? Equation. All right, so what do? We have to firstly we have to identify what is there to find a value of. We need to find the value of x, obviously, because in all the equation, in the whole equation, this is one thing which is unknown to us, right? So variables are always unknown to us, right? So when we simplify any equation, we simplify with regard of making one variable the subject. Okay, similarly, when we are finding out the value of an equation, we find out the value of the unknown. So what is the unknown in the whole equation? Is the variable that's there. Okay, so what do? We say 6x plus 3 is equals to, now multiplying 3 with this whole, okay, with this whole bracket. So it's going to be 3 times 2. First we're going to multiply these two together, so it's going to be 6x, right, plus 3, right? Now as I say this, it's going to be what? Both of these are going to be giving us the same answer. So we say that we have officially found the correct value because as both the sides are equal, right? Now let's just move on to another example. Okay, so let me just copy it here. All right, so this is the equation right now, right? The next equation is this. So how do we solve it? Similarly, we're gonna multiply 2 with this whole bracket. So it's gonna be 2 times 7. It's gonna become 14, right? And then 2 multiplied by y as well. So it's gonna be negative 2y, right? Plus 5y equals to 4, right? Now we're gonna add these two like terms together, and then we're gonna move this term over here. Because why? Because we need to make, okay, so why? Because we need to make the like term, we need to make y the subject. So in order to make y the subject, we have to separate it. So by separating it, we have to move 14 onto the other side. And because 14 is in positive right now, when it's going to go to the other side, it's going to be what? It's going to be 4 minus 14. It's going to be negative, right? And then by simplifying this, negative 2 plus 5, negative 2y plus 5y, it's going to become 3y, right? Now we need to simplify this half as well. So it's going to be 4 minus 14 is going to give us negative 10, right? Now we have to make y the subject. In order to make y the subject, we're going to have to make 3 move. How can we make 3 move? Because it's in multiply right now, it's going to go into divide when we move it to the other side. So it's going to become 10, my negative 10 divided by 3. So that's going to be our final answer. So this negative 10 divided by 3 is the value of y. Do you understand this? So this is how we solve a normal equation, right? Now we move on to the other part of this, which is factorization. All right, so the second part, after understanding the difference between what's an expression and how to simplify it, now we move on to the other part of the equation, which is other part of this topic, which is factorization. We can definitely factorize any given expression. All right, we can factorize it right? We can factorize any given equation. So how do I factorize the different equations? Okay, so let's say I have a quadratic equation, right? Factorization only in majority of the time factorization works. Factorization in majority of the cases, factorization, right? So factorization majority of the time it works in quadratic equation. Now what's a quadratic um, expression or equation? So what's a quadratic expression or equation, right? Can anybody answer me? Can anybody answer me what's a quadratic expression or an equation? All right, so a quadratic equation is something which has a power of 2 on the variable. All right, quadratic equation is expression is something which has a power of 2 on the variable. Power of 2 on variable, right? If I say that if I say that it's x square, so what does it mean by that? It means now it's a quadratic expression, right? Because x has a square on it. Do you understand this? Similarly, if I say it's x square minus 4, that means now it's a quadratic expression. We can say 2x square plus 3x plus 4. So it's a quadratic expression. Now you might ask me that right now it has a power of 2 and a power of 1 as well. So which one do we take? Power of 2 of a variable. This whole equation has at least one variable which has a power of 2. That means it's a quadratic expression. Okay, so now we're going to factorize it. What do I mean by factorizing it? Factorizing it means that we're going to enclose it into two different factors. Now in the previous lesson we've learned that what exactly is a factor. Factor is something that a number can be divided by. Similarly, in terms of expression, a factor is something which an expression can be divided by. Okay, a factor is something by which an expression or an equation, okay, or an equation, both of them can be divided by, and which leaves 0 as a remainder, right? Okay, so which leaves 0 as a remainder. So what do I mean by that? I hope this is visible to all of you, right? A factor is something by which an expression or an equation can be divided by and it leaves 0 as a remainder. All right, so in terms of general numbers, if I say that 2 is a factor of 8. So what do I mean by that? If I divide 8 by 2, I'm gonna get an answer of 4, right? And I'm gonna get 0 as a remainder. Okay, so this is a remainder and this is 0. Hence, I say that 2 is a factor, right? So similarly, in terms of equations as well, in terms of expressions as well, we're gonna find different factors. All right, so a quadratic equation, because it has a square of, like it has a square on the variable, that means there are going to be two factors for a quadratic equation. Something to note down: for a quadratic equation or expression, a quadratic equation or expression, there are going to be two factors always. Okay, so there are going to be two expressions, and that's a standard. Right, that is something which is not going to be changed. Do all of you understand this? Now I'm going to show you different ways to find out factors of a quadratic equation. All right, so one of the ways for factorization, number one thing is to use the algebraic formulas. Okay, so you might ask me what are algebraic formulas. So um, some of you might be already familiar with them. So it goes like a plus b whole square. And what does it mean by a plus b whole square? Is going to be a square plus 2ab plus b square. So this is one of the algebraic formulas. There are in total there are three algebraic formulas. So can anybody tell me the other one? Can anybody tell me the other one? All right, so I'm gonna need some answers from you guys because it's gonna be very dry if I don't get an answer. So please do comment your answers in the comment box below. All right, so it's gonna be a minus b whole square. It's gonna give us a square minus 2ab plus b square. So this form is called an expanded form, right? Expanded form, and this form is called a factorized one. Okay, so this form is called a factorized form. All right, now if I go on to the third part, it's going to be a square. Okay, so it's going to be a plus b multiplied by a minus b. All right, so it's going to be what? A square minus b square. Now I'm gonna show you how I'm gonna factorize. What do I mean by when I say factorized form? So if I say that you have an expression which is x square minus 64, right? So what are we gonna do? We're gonna take x square, like x whole square minus, is 64 a square of some number? So let's try this. Okay, so can 64 be divided by 2, right? So it's going to be 32. We're going to further divide it with 2. It's going to become what? 16, right? We're going to further divide it. It's going to become 8. And we're going to divide it again. It's going to become 4, and then again it's going to become 2, and then again it's going to become 1. So if I place it, it's going to be 2 into 2 into 2 into 2 into 2, right? How many twos are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So it's going to be 2. So it could be, we can write it as 2 to the power 6, but now we don't need 2 to the power 6. We just need any number which is a square. So we're gonna take at least how many numbers? So if I take the first three, the other three are going to be exactly the same. So if I'm going to write it as 2 into 2 into 2 and square. So what's going to be this? So it's going to be 8. So 64 is basically a square of 8, right? It's going to be a square of 8. What are we going to do next? So does this form seems similar to this because it's going to be a square, right, minus b square. So what are we going to do now? What are we going to do now? We can factorize it using this algebraic formula. We can just directly write down, in place of a it's x, right, and in place of b it's 8. So a plus b, right, to x, so x plus 8 minus, oh sorry, multiplied by x minus 8. This is how we're going to factorize this quadratic equation into this form. Okay, so is there anybody who doesn't understand this? Is there anybody who doesn't understand this? Can I get an answer? Is there anyone who does not understand this? All right, so by the looks of it, it seems like everybody else understands it, right? So now we're going to move on to the other part. Likely, like I said, that using algebraic formulas to factorize an equation is just one part. All right. So now we're gonna do another part, which is factorizing it using middle term breaking. All right. Factorizing an expression using middle term breaking. All okay, sir. Perfect. Breaking. So how are we going to do this? Can anybody has any idea what are we gonna do? What do we do when I say my middle term breaking? We are gonna do middle term breaking. What do I mean by that? Anyone has any idea? All right, so let me just brief you. Right, so if I have an equation, if I have a quadratic expression like 2x squared plus 5x minus 3 plus 5x minus 3. So what do I do this? How do I do this? What do I do in this? Okay, so just there are simple steps which I'm going to explain you right now, and you're going to follow the exact same steps to reach an answer. All right, so what exactly are we going to do? We're going to take the first number and the last numbers. The first number, which is being multiplied with x squared, that's the number we're going to take. And then we're going to take the number which has no variable attached to it. All right, so we're going to take both of these numbers like and multiply them together. So it's going to be negative 3 times negative 3 times 2. All right, so if it's negative 3 times 2, what's the answer that we're going to get? Is we're going to get negative 6, right? Now we need to find any two numbers that multiply together to form negative 6, right? And then add up together to form plus 5. Okay, so what are going to be the two numbers? Can anybody guess? What are the two numbers that multiply together to form negative 6 and add up together to form plus 5? So what are going to be the two numbers? All right, so let's just do this, right? So it's going to be 2 we're gonna be left with 3. So if I do this, we're gonna be left with 1. So if I can take both of these numbers. If I add them together, I'm gonna get -1. I'm not getting +5. So what do? There's another factor which is -6 times +1. So if I multiply them, I'm gonna get -6. But if I'm gonna add them, so it's gonna be, if I'm gonna take, right, instead of -6, I take -1. All right, so if I multiply 6 by -1, I'm going to get -6. But if I add them or maybe subtract them, it's going to be 5, right? So these are the two numbers which can replace positive 5x, right? So I'm going to write 6x minus 1 instead of 5x. So it's going to be what? Plus 6x minus x minus 3, right? And from the first two number, I'm gonna find out what's common. So what's common in the first two numbers? What's common in the first two numbers? Can anybody tell me? There's 2 common, there's x common. So I'm gonna be left with just 1 over here, right? So it's gonna be x squared, right? So what's common? It's 2 and x, both of these are common. So I'm gonna be left with x over here, right? Similarly, if I leave it out, if I take this out as a common, I'm going to be left with what times 2x makes 6x? So 3, right? So if I multiply 2x with 3, I'm going to become it's going to become 6x again. So I'm doing it correct, right? Similarly, there's nothing common in this, all right? So I'm going to take -1 common. I'm going to be left with x plus 3 again. One thing to identify if your middle term breaking is correct, it means that both of these factors are supposed to be same. Okay, so as I'm getting both of these same, I'm gonna write down x plus 3 only once, and then I'm gonna make up a bracket of these two numbers as well. So it's gonna be 2x minus 1. So this is how I write my two factors. Okay, so this equation can be factorized into this form. Does Is there anyone who doesn't understand this? Is this clear? Is there anybody who does not understand this? So somebody has already answered me correctly. Perfect. So is there anyone who does not understand this? Perfect. Right. Now I'm gonna give you, okay, so I'm gonna do what now? Okay, so does everyone of you understand this completely? Right. So what are we gonna do next? Okay, so in the next step, we're going to take some of the equations, okay, and now we're going to factorize them fully. Okay, so the first full equation is this one. So can anybody tell me the answer to this equation? How are we going to do this? We are going to factorize it completely. So how are we going to factorize it completely? Can anybody answer me? We're going to use middle term breaking, right? We're going to use middle term breaking, right? So how are we going to use middle term breaking? Can anybody summarize what I just said in the comments below? Like, how are we going to middle term break this whole equation? Come on, guys, make it interactive now. Okay, so what am I gonna do? Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the first number and multiply it with the other number. All right, so it's gonna become 2 multiplied by -6. So what's the answer? The answer is gonna be -12, right? And now if I have to find two terms, when multiplied together, they're gonna become -12, and when they're added together, they leave me with +1. So what are gonna be those two terms, right? So yeah, somebody has correctly answered it. Perfect. So it's going to be 12. Now take an LCM. It's going to become 6. Now take an LCM again. It's going to become 3 and then 3. Now we just live with this. All right. So one factor is 4 and then 3. So if I take, all right, so I have to make positive 1, right? So I'm going to take +4, multiply it with -3. So it's going to become -12. And if I add both of these, it's going to become 1, right? So these are the two factors which I'm going to replace 1x with. So it's going to be 2x squared plus 4x minus 3x minus 6, right? So I have to take these both common in the first two terms. So what's the common in the first two terms? Is going to be 2x. I'm going to be left with x over here plus 2, right? Similarly, what's common in the second two terms? It's -3, which is common. I'm going to be left with x plus 2, right? So as both of these terms are exactly the same, I can say that my middle term breaking was successful. So I'm going to write this term once. It's going to be x plus 2, and then I'm going to take both of these two terms and compile them into a factor. So it's going to be 2x minus 3. So this is how I'm gonna write my two factors. Does everybody understand this, or is there anyone who does not understand this? Right? Is this clear? Everybody, is this clear? All right. Now, if it was not an expression, if it had equals to 0 in this, all of these steps would be exactly the same, except for at each step there would be equals to 0 along with it. So till this step it's going to be exactly the same. It does not matter if it's going to be an expression or an equation. So from then onwards, there's only one difference that's going to be there. In order to find out the value of x, there are going to be two values of x because it's a quadratic equation. Because of x squared, in linear equation where x power 1 was there, we only had one value of x. We only had one value of x. Like I've explained it to you, that if it's going to be x squared, there's going to be two factor, hence two values. Okay, so we're going to get two values from here. So how are we going to get two values? We're going to make each one of these factors, take each one of these factors and equate them with 0. Okay, so the first factor is x plus 2, equate them with 0, and the other factor is then 2x minus 3 equals to 0. So the answer to the first factor is going to be x equals to -2. All right, so that's the first value of x. Now coming on to the second part, it's going to be 2x equals to 3, and then we're going to get the value of x as 3 divided by 2, right? So this is the difference between, like, this is one more step in terms of equation that we're going to do, and this is where we leave for an expression, right? So that's how you solve an expression, a quadratic expression or an equation. All right, When it's an equation, you give a final value. When an expression, you just leave it at factors. Is that correct? All right. This step is just for equation only, right? This step is for equation only. Does everybody understand this? Is there anyone who does not understand this? Just text me. All right, so we're gonna move on to the to another question. All right, this time we're gonna do this last question for today. All right, this is gonna be the last question for today. All right, so give as much input as possible. All right, so this is how the question looks. The question is 4x squared minus 25. So what do we do? It says factorize fully, but I'm gonna erase that and I'm gonna say find the value of x. Now I'm gonna make this an equation. Right? So what do we do? In this question now, what do we do? See, it does not have a middle term, right? So we cannot use the second way that we've studied. We cannot use the middle term breaking. All right, I'm just gonna write down MTB, middle term breaking. So we cannot use this. We have to use the first way, which was using an algebraic formula. All right, so which algebraic formula do we apply over here? Okay, so this was the list of algebraic formulas, right? Which algebraic formula do we apply over here? So we cannot apply these two because they require a middle term and it does not have a middle term. So it can only be option 3. All right. So the algebraic formula says a square minus b square, right? So how do I make this equation as an a square or b square? So is 4 a square of something? 4 is a square of 2, right? So I write 4x and a whole square over it, right? Similarly, is 5 a square of some number? Yes. 5 is 25 a square of some number? Yes, 25 is a square of 5. So I write 5 squared, right, equals to 0, right? Now what do I do? It's in this form. Now I have to convert it into a plus b, a minus b, just as simple. All right, so this is a and this is b. So 2x plus 5 and 2x minus 5, right, equals to 0. Now there are two factors formed. So what do? We make each one of them become equal to 0. All right, so 2x plus 5 equals to 0. My answer is going to be what? 2x equals to negative 5, and the answer is going to be negative 5 over 2, right? So this is one answer, this is one value. The other value is going to be what? 2x minus 5 equals to 0. 5 is going to go to the other side, it's going to become 5, positive 5, and then I'm going to find out the value of, I'm going to move 2 to the other side, it's going to become 5 divided by 2, right? So these are the two values which I get when I solve this equation, this quadratic equation. So does everybody here understand this? Is there any one of you who does not understand this? Like, some of you have already answered to my question. That's great. I see that. All right. So thank you so much for joining in, guys. Um, from tomorrow, in the other class, we're gonna move on to the other topic. All right, which is related to this one. We're gonna move on to inequalities, and then further move on to how to solve simultaneous equations, what are simultaneous equation, and similarly to functions and graph. All right, so a lot of stuff to follow. All right, so this is just one portion where you've identified the difference between an equation and an expression and how to find out the values. Right, so I hope everything's clear for today. All right, all right, so see you guys soon, hopefully. All right, take care. Goodbye. Oh, of course, of course. I have a question. I have a question. Yes, yes, of course. Go ahead, ask. What is for is right? So this is just the beginning. All right. So it's gonna get. I'm gonna start off with a little basic and then move ahead, and we're gonna do differentiation and integration as well. It's gonna go pretty um, to the to the difficult side very soon in the coming up lectures. Is gonna be it's gonna have some very difficult questions ahead as well. All right. So, is there any other question?